Hello and welcome to World Talks on TVP World with me, Ashim Kumar. Iran's leadership is facing one of its most serious tests in years as protests driven by economic hardship spread across much of the country, prompting deaths, mass arrests and stark warnings from Washington. At the same time, US foreign policy is shifting dramatically from threats of intervention in Iran to ambitions over Greenland, to the removal of Venezuela's president. And to unpack all of these developments, we're joined by Tom Tugendhat. He's a former British security minister, to assess the global security implications. Mr. Tugendhat, welcome to TVP World. Thanks for taking time.
It's good to see you.
So, big picture, what do you see are the implications of these protests in Tehran, which have been going on, or in Iran, I beg your pardon, been going on for about 9 days now, 25 plus deaths reported so far?
Well, we're pretty close to 40 years, just over 40 years from the Islamic Revolution, which happened in around this time. 40-something years ago, 47, 48 years ago. And it's a real echo of that we're seeing. We're seeing the bazaars, the shop owners in pretty open revolt. We're seeing a whole series of people taking to the street. And while this has been said to be economic, and certainly there's always an economic element to any protest, the reality is this is much more fundamental than that. And we see it by the fact that there are any number of women tearing off their veils. There are any number of students who are out on the streets. And we're seeing a real confrontation between not just people on the streets and the system, but we're beginning to see indications that the army, which is extremely badly paid in Iran, is beginning to get into small confrontations with the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, which is, as you know, the sort of the Praetorian Guard, the bodyguard of the Islamic regime, who are very, very rich, having been exploiting the corruption of the regime for decades now.
So, I mean, that sounds as though there are a number of fissures appearing in the cohesion of the country, both militarily and socially and politically. Is there a way that the theocratic leadership can actually bring the country together again?
No, I don't think there is. I mean, I think there's a real question as to when it collapses. It might be in the next week, it might be in the next few months, or it might not be for a few years. But the reality is the theocratic regime is over. The only question is, when does it fall? And incidents like Venezuela, which many people will realize was not just an oil state in South America, but was the principal route for financing for the Iranian regime and for its terrorist acolytes like Hezbollah, and also one of the places where the regime was able to make its weapons, including ballistic missiles and engines for drones. You'll see that actually it's not just the regime, it's not just the protests, it's the entire infrastructure, that sort of architecture of terror that has maintained the regime, the architecture of crime that has maintained the regime, that is collapsing all around it. And so I think the reality is the regime is over. I'm sure various of the senior officials are already talking to foreign intelligence assets and trying to make their way out, trying to buy passage. And what we're watching now is the death throes before the whole thing collapses.
Understood. So what happened to the Revolutionary Guard? I mean, there are rumours, of course, that the theological leaders of the country are talking, as you say, to other countries, and including Russia, where they've been offered asylum. But what about people in the Revolutionary Guard, and what happened to them? Are they following that path?
Well, one or two of the senior generals probably are. It's very hard to be able to be certain. But there'll be an awful lot of the more junior members who are just going to be abandoned. And the question is, how long will their loyalty last? I mean, countries that have come out of dictatorship whether it's communist dictatorship or theocratic dictatorship, doesn't really matter. There's always a moment when it is clear the regime won't go on. And so you don't end up with a sort of crumbling, a slow crumbling. You end up with a catastrophic fracture. And I think Iran is getting closer to that moment. And the courage of the Iranian protesters, some of whom are calling for the restoration of the king, others who are merely calling for the downfall of the regime, is precipitating that as quickly as possible.
Well, I mean, should countries be worried? A collapse as quickly as you suggest, that happens as quickly as you suggest, leaves a vacuum. And, well, you know, vacuums produce uncertainty, and that could have complications around the world, couldn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. It certainly could, and which is why, you know, it's mostly for Middle Eastern neighbours, but it's also for countries in Europe and the United States to begin thinking quite seriously what happens when this regime goes. Because it does have nuclear technology, it has ballistic missile technology, apart from anything, but it also has a very, very large population of people who will need some form of stability, will need all the sort of things that have been kept from them by the regime, medicine, food, and many other things, in order to survive. You know, we are already seeing that the water situation in and around Tehran is extremely seriously depleted. We're already seeing the environmental damage in the area is very greatly impacting people. So, you know, what we need to see is a support package when that regime goes. But I think that that's something that we need to be talking about separately and away from the regime. I don't think we should be getting involved in the internal politics of Iran. It's up to the Iranian people to decide what their future looks like. All I'm doing is observing.
Is this an opportunity for the son of the former Shah of Iran to step into the role of leadership, even if it's only temporary?
Look, I think that's very hard to say. It's not something I can really comment on. I've heard completely conflicting positions on that, including from the son of the Shah himself, where he has said he in the past he said he merely wishes to be an enabler for the freedom of the Iranian people and wasn't looking for a position for himself. Now, you know, I'm afraid you'll have to ask the different views within the Iranian society. But I think, like many societies, the views are extremely divergent. I think for many of us, what we've got to look at is not only the unpicking that we're seeing in Iran and the consequential, one would hope, liberation of huge amounts of human energy and, of course, carbon energy as well, hydrocarbon energy as well, which would be wonderful for the world to have some of the most imaginative and creative people back in full engagement with the whole world. But also, you'll see a change in the way that Russia is able to brutalize Ukraine or indeed threaten Poland, as we saw those drones that flew over into Poland about a month ago, about 21, I think it was, 22 drones, something like that. They were an Iranian design, the Shahed design. Some of them made in Iran, others made in Russia. And that would knock out some element of Russian support. One shouldn't overstate it, but it would certainly knock out some element of Russian support. And of course, increasing energy supplies would undermine Russia's economy, which is incredibly energy-based. It's mostly based
I want to focus on the energy issue as well in just a second. In the last couple of minutes that we have left, President Trump has decapitated Venezuelan leadership, kidnapped and arrested the president and his wife. They were standing trial right now. As you mentioned earlier, that was a place where Iran's proxies were being supplied from, trained, and so on. What does this mean for the Iranian revolution as it is happening now?
Well, it's a real indicator that the United States is a serious country. You know, many countries speak about the kind of actions they're going to have in others, and indeed we've seen Iranian proxies in Hezbollah and Hamas and the Houthis attacking other countries. But it's only the United States that has, removed Qasem Soleimani roughly, in fact, almost exactly 6 years ago. I think it was the 3rd of January 2020, when he was struck by a US drone strike in Iraq, and he was the then leader of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the Iranian militia that guards the revolution. And it's only the United States who could possibly have carried out an operation like the one that removed Maduro. So these are really very strong advertisements in what is the nature of strong power. What does it mean to be powerful? And the reality is that that's a signal to the Iranians that, frankly, the Americans have had enough. And the way in which they've murdered hundreds of thousands of Syrians, threatened Saudis, murdered Yemenis, murdered Israelis, and murdered many, many thousands of Lebanese. The Americans have just finally had enough.
Right. Now, the change in leadership in Venezuela, I mean, there are other influences there as well, are there not? China and Russia being two of them. What does that mean in terms of that dynamic? I mean, Venezuela is no longer a reliable source of oil or other resources for those countries. What do they do next, especially in light of what's happening in Iran?
Well, the real challenge for China is it has other sources of energy, including domestically. It has a lot of coal and, of course, some solar and a lot of solar and wind, as well as nuclear. But in terms of hydrocarbons, it gets a lot from Iran and it gets a fair amount as well from Venezuela. So knocking both of those countries out of the Chinese supply chain for hydrocarbons would be a problem. It's certainly not insurmountable, but it would be a problem for Beijing. As for Russia, well, Russia has used Venezuela in a way to launder money, to buy goods, to ship items to client states, and to undermine the sanctions regimes that have been set on them. So this will be a blow to them because it will be harder for them to get round it. Now, of course, if the United States then supports Venezuela in increasing its production from the million or so barrels a day that they're pumping today to 3 or 4 or 5 in a few years' time, then again you'll see the pressure on the oil price. And the problem for Russia is that anything under, well, it depends who you ask, but anything under 40 or 50 dollars per barrel effectively means it's a cost for Russia, not a benefit, because Russia is so hydrocarbon dependent, so dependent on oil sales, that without it, its entire economy collapses.
Understood. Unfortunately, we're going to have to stop it there. We see lots of pieces in play, Mr. Tugendhat. Come back and see us again soon as things develop. Have a good evening, sir.
Thank you. Happy New Year.
Thank you. Same to you. Bye-bye. And that brings us to the end of this episode of World Talks. Don't go away. Lots more coming up. Goodbye.